In 1943, deep inside the war rooms of Berlin, German generals studied reports that made no sense. American shipyards, they were told, were launching cargo vessels faster than the Kriegsmarine could sink them. 2 ships every single day. The numbers looked impossible. But what they were seeing wasn't a mistake. It was the beginning of the end for Hitler's war at sea. When World War II began, Germany's greatest weapon wasn't its tanks or aircraft. It was its U-boat fleet. The Battle of the Atlantic became the longest and most vital struggle of the entire war. German submarines prowled the ocean, sinking Allied cargo ships at an alarming rate. Every ton of steel, every bullet, every gallon of fuel needed for the war had to cross the Atlantic, and Germany's wolfpacks were tearing that lifeline apart. By 1942, the situation looked dire for the Allies. Britain was running out of food and supplies. America, freshly entered into the war, was scrambling to find a way to keep the flow of materials going. If the Atlantic supply line failed, the entire war effort would collapse. And that's when a radical idea took shape. An idea so simple, yet so audacious, that it would change the course of the war. Build ships faster than the Germans could sink them. It all started with an emergency program called the Emergency Shipbuilding Program, launched by the U.S. Maritime Commission. The goal was clear: produce hundreds, then thousands, of cargo vessels at unprecedented speed. But there was a problem. Traditional shipbuilding took time. A standard cargo ship before the war could take a year or more to construct. The Allies didn't have that luxury. They needed ships now, not next year. So American engineers looked for a radical solution. They turned to mass production, the same industrial philosophy that had made Ford automobiles and Boeing aircraft in huge numbers. The result? The Liberty ship, a 441-foot-long cargo vessel made of steel, powered by a triple-expansion steam engine, and capable of carrying over 10,000 tons of cargo. It wasn't fast, it wasn't pretty, and it wasn't even particularly innovative. But it was cheap, reliable, and easy to build. The design came from a British prototype, the Ocean class, but when America took over the blueprint, it transformed it into an industrial miracle. The key breakthrough was the idea of prefabrication. Instead of building ships piece by piece in the dockyard, American shipyards built sections, massive steel plates, bulkheads, and hull segments, in factories miles away, then shipped them to the yard for final assembly. Welders replaced riveters, saving weeks of labor. Cranes hoisted entire sections into place like giant Lego blocks. Work went on 24 hours a day, under floodlights, in shifts around the clock. At shipyards like Kaiser's Richmond Yard in California, something extraordinary was happening. A new kind of warfare, industrial warfare. Henry Kaiser, a construction tycoon who had never built a ship before, brought the same efficiency he'd used building the Hoover Dam. He applied modern management, assembly line production, and worker motivation techniques that turned ordinary laborers into a shipbuilding army. Within months, Liberty ships were rolling out of American yards at speeds that stunned the world. By 1943, shipyards were launching 1 Liberty ship every 8 hours. Reports began to reach German naval intelligence. They didn't believe them. How could a nation, even one as industrially advanced as the United States, build a full-sized cargo ship in less than a week? Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, dismissed the numbers at first. But soon, he saw the truth with his own eyes. U-boats would sink Allied convoys, only to find new ones forming days later. It was as if the ships were multiplying faster than they could destroy them. In a meeting recorded in Berlin, one German officer remarked grimly, "They are not building ships. They are producing them, like machines. At this rate, we cannot win this war." Each Liberty ship became a symbol of America's industrial strength. They carried everything: tanks, fuel, ammunition, aircraft, food, and troops. Some even carried locomotives and entire bridge sections across the Atlantic. And despite being called ugly ducklings, they played a beautiful role in saving the world. These ships weren't just steel and rivets. They were floating lifelines. Every time one left port, it carried the hopes of soldiers fighting in North Africa, the Pacific, and Europe. To the men who built them, they weren't just ships. They were a weapon of endurance, a promise that democracy could outbuild tyranny. By 1943, as Liberty ships began flooding the seas, the balance of the Battle of the Atlantic began to shift. German U-boats, once confident hunters, found themselves overwhelmed. Convoys grew larger, more heavily escorted, and better equipped. Even if a dozen ships were sunk, dozens more were already on their way. It wasn't the end of the U-boat war yet, but it was the beginning of the end. The factories of America had become more powerful than any weapon the Nazis possessed. For every torpedo that struck, 2 new ships sailed. For every loss at sea, another victory was being welded together on land. The Liberty ships were turning the tide, not with speed or firepower, but with sheer unstoppable production. Before the Liberty ships became legends, the Atlantic was a graveyard. In early 1942, the German U-boat fleet ruled the ocean. The Allies called it the happy time, but it was only happy for the Germans. Off the American coast, tankers and cargo ships were burning night after night, easy targets silhouetted against city lights. German submarines cruised so close to the U.S. shoreline that their commanders could see the glow of New York City in the distance. In just 6 months, U-boats sank more than 3 million tons of Allied shipping. Britain's imports, vital food, ammunition, oil, fell to dangerously low levels. Churchill himself would later admit, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. The Allies needed ships, fast, but shipyards were losing the race against time. Each loss took months to replace. Every convoy that didn't arrive meant fewer tanks for Montgomery, fewer supplies for the Soviets, and fewer bombers for raids over Germany." America's entry into the war promised manpower and machines, but without ships to carry them, none of it mattered. So the U.S. Maritime Commission gathered industrial minds, shipbuilders, and engineers in Washington. The question was blunt. How fast can we build ships before Britain starves and our troops fight empty-handed? Traditional shipbuilding methods couldn't keep up. A single steel-hulled freighter could take 230–300 days to complete. That's when the Commission's leader, Admiral Emory Land, and industrialist Henry Kaiser proposed something radical. A crash program of standardized ships, built not by shipwrights, but by factories. Kaiser's team studied Ford's assembly line methods and thought, if we can build 50,000 cars a month, why not ships? The ship they chose as the foundation was the British Ocean class, a solid, reliable cargo vessel. But America redesigned it, simplified parts, replaced rivets with welds, and modified the blueprints so every shipyard could use identical components. The new ship would be named the Liberty ship. When Kaiser began building shipyards along the coasts, places like Richmond, California, and Portland, Oregon, skeptics laughed. These were men who had never built ships before. Some came from construction, some from auto manufacturing. His labor force? Mostly ordinary Americans, farmers, mechanics, even housewives. By mid-1942, women were streaming into the shipyards. They called them Rosie the Riveters, though most were welders, crane operators, or blueprint readers. Kaiser turned these workers into the backbone of an industrial army. He introduced cafeteria meals, healthcare plans, and daycare for mothers, things unheard of at the time. To keep his workforce motivated and tireless, each worker had a single goal: build faster, build more. In the early days, a Liberty ship still took months to build. The first few launched after 240 days, barely an improvement. But Kaiser was relentless. He studied every minute lost, every bottleneck in production. By autumn 1942, the average time had dropped to 45 days per ship, then 30, then 20, and then, at the Richmond yard, a record that would shock the world. The SS Robert E. Peary, fully built and launched in just 4 days, 15 hours, and 30 minutes. Back in Germany, reports began pouring into OKM, the Oberkommando der Marine, the German Navy's high command. Intelligence officers couldn't believe what they were reading. The Allies had lost 800 ships that year. But somehow, American production was already replacing them faster than they were sunk. In 1943 alone, the United States would produce 2,010 Liberty ships, roughly 2 every day. To the Germans, this was more terrifying than any weapon. One captured U-boat commander later recalled, "We felt like men trying to empty the ocean with a bucket." Even as Germany's finest engineers developed advanced submarines like the Type 30, the Americans were flooding the seas with so many targets that no strategy could keep up. This was more than just logistics. It was industrial warfare, and America had just taken the high ground. The shipyards became symbols of unity. Teenagers lied about their age to get hired. Retirees came out of retirement to do their part. Every ship launched was marked with a celebration, a band playing, crowds cheering, and the workers watching proudly as another Liberty ship slid down the slipway, ready to face the Atlantic. For many of them, it wasn't just a job, it was personal. Some had brothers or sons fighting in North Africa or the Pacific. They knew that somewhere out there, one of these ships might be carrying the supplies that would save their lives. Every rivet, every weld, was an act of defiance against Hitler. Germany believed war would be won with bombs and tanks. America proved it could also be won with blueprints, cranes, and the will of a free people. By late 1942, convoys grew larger, escorts more numerous, and losses fewer. German U-boats were still deadly, but the Allies could finally replace what they lost. The tide of the Atlantic was beginning to shift, not through strategy alone, but through unstoppable production. What the generals in Berlin hadn't realized yet was that the true weapon of America wasn't tea in the skies or on the battlefield. It was in the shipyards. The Liberty ships were not just vessels of war. They were the embodiment of America's greatest strength, its ability to turn despair into momentum and overwhelm tyranny with industry. By 1943, in the heart of Berlin, the mood was shifting from arrogance to anxiety. For years, the German High Command had boasted about the invincibility of their U-boat fleet. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the Kriegsmarine's submarine force, believed he could strangle Britain into submission by cutting off its lifeline, the Atlantic supply routes, and for a time, it looked like he would. British ports were choked with damaged ships. Thousands of tons of food and fuel never made it across the sea. The Kriegsmarine's propaganda machine celebrated each sinking, each convoy destroyed. But something strange began to appear in German intelligence reports. Shipping tonnage was not dropping. Despite relentless attacks, the Allies had more merchant ships at sea than ever before. How was this possible? At first, Dönitz thought it was an error, inflated Allied propaganda perhaps. But when the Abwehr confirmed through spies in Lisbon and Stockholm that American shipyards were turning out vessels faster than the U-boats could sink them, disbelief spread through the ranks. "It's a fabrication," one German admiral muttered. "No nation can build ships that quickly." But they could. And they were. In America, shipyards were running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The clang of steel and the hiss of welding torches echoed through the night like a battle cry. At Kaiser's Richmond shipyard, the process had become a science and a spectacle. Prefabricated hull sections were built in parallel, transported by rail, and lowered into dry docks like pieces of an enormous puzzle. Engineers didn't build one ship from start to finish. They built dozens at once, all in different stages of assembly. Each shift change was a military operation. Workers filed in by the thousands. Entire families worked together. Fathers welding steel, mothers handling wiring, and sons driving cranes. By early 1943, a Liberty ship launched every 10 hours. 18 shipyards across the U.S. were working in perfect rhythm. And in less than 2 years, America had built more tonnage than the entire Japanese merchant fleet. This wasn't just production, it was a transformation of society. America had become a war machine unlike anything the world had ever seen. Across the Atlantic, Dönitz's U-boats continued their deadly patrols. But something was different now. When they surfaced at night, they no longer found empty waters. They found convoys stretching across the horizon, escorted by destroyers, frigates, and corvettes, and all of them replenished by a constant stream of Liberty ships. The Germans would sink 10 in a week, and 20 more would appear the next. "They came like ants," recalled one U-boat captain after the war. "No matter how many we destroyed, more were there. It was like fighting the sea itself. The very concept of victory at sea was slipping through their fingers." The U-boat commanders began to call it der Schiffsflut, the flood of ships. By spring 1943, it was no longer the Allies who feared starvation. It was Germany. Inside a war council meeting in Berlin, senior officers gathered to discuss logistics. Among them was Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments. He had just returned from an inspection tour and brought disturbing news. "Mein Führer," Speer said, "the Americans have discovered the secret of mass production. They are building entire fleets as if they were toys." Hitler scoffed, accusing Speer of exaggeration. But Speer pressed on. "Our factories cannot compete. They have turned industry itself into a weapon." The room fell silent. For the first time, the German leadership began to understand that this war would not be won by bravery or tactics alone. It would be won by industrial output. Every time a German soldier destroyed a tank, the Americans built 3 more. Every time a U-boat sank a freighter, the Americans built 2 more. It was a realization so profound that even hardened generals like Heinz Guderian later admitted, "We underestimated America's capacity to produce war material. We had no idea a nation could manufacture entire armies across an ocean." Meanwhile, out at sea, the Liberty ships themselves became floating symbols of this new kind of warfare. They weren't glamorous, slow, boxy, and often called ugly ducklings, but they carried everything from tanks and trucks to fuel, ammunition, and food. Some even carried troops or repaired aircraft on deck mid-journey. And despite their simplicity, they were tough. In one case, the SS Stephen Hopkins, armed with just a single deck gun, took on a heavily armed German raider, the Steyr. Both ships were destroyed, but the Hopkins crew fought until their last shell. That bravery became legendary. To the Germans, these ships seemed endless. To the Allies, they were lifelines, living proof that America could outbuild, outlast, and eventually outfight the Reich. By late 1943, the war at sea had become a battle not of strategy, but of endurance. Dönitz knew that even with improved U-boats and radar systems, Germany could never sink ships faster than the Americans could build them. The equation was impossible. His once proud submarine fleet was dwindling. Fresh recruits replaced the dead, but their chances of survival dropped with each month. The Atlantic, once their hunting ground, had turned against them. For Germany, the ocean had become an open wound, and every Liberty ship that crossed it poured salt into that wound. But the story of America's industrial miracle wasn't over yet, because soon the Liberty ship would become more than a cargo carrier. It would become the symbol of a nation's unstoppable momentum. By 1943, America's industrial war machine was fully awake, and there was no turning it off. Across the nation, from the shipyards of Richmond to the docks of Baltimore, the sound of production thundered day and night. What began as a desperate attempt to replace ships had become a movement of national pride and unstoppable momentum. The scale was beyond comprehension. 600,000 workers across 18 shipyards, 30,000 subcontractors supplying parts, engines, and steel. Entire rail lines dedicated solely to carrying Liberty ship components. America wasn't just building ships, it was building victory itself. Kaiser shipyards had effectively turned the process into a giant human clockwork. Each worker was a cog, each ship a tick closer to the end of tyranny. A journalist visiting Richmond described it as a city that never slept, fueled by sparks and patriotism. Meanwhile, beneath the Atlantic, Admiral Karl Dönitz sat in his headquarters, surrounded by reports that read like obituaries. Entire U-boat wolf packs were being lost within weeks. Radar-equipped Allied aircraft, destroyers with sonar, and long-range patrol bombers made every patrol a death sentence. The Kriegsmarine had once celebrated each sinking with triumph. Now they counted how many subs never came home. German intelligence continued to report staggering numbers from across the ocean. By 1943, America had launched over 1,200 Liberty ships, with another 1,500 already under construction. For every U-boat produced in Germany, America launched 10 merchant ships. One officer bitterly remarked, "It is as if they are manufacturing the ocean itself." Berlin finally understood that industrial production, not battlefield heroics, would determine the outcome of the war. The Battle of the Atlantic, once a nightmare for the Allies, was shifting. The Liberty ship had tipped the scales. Convoys were no longer limping across the Atlantic. They were rolling fortresses. Armed with new tactics, radar escorts, and air cover, the Allied fleets turned the hunter into the hunted. In May 1943, the Allies destroyed 41 German U-boats in a single month. It was a devastating blow, one from which the Kriegsmarine would never recover. The Germans called it Black May. "We have lost the Battle of the Atlantic," Dönitz admitted quietly to his staff. And with that admission, the dream of starving Britain into submission was dead. But the true reason for this defeat wasn't just Allied tactics. It was American industry's ability to produce faster than destruction itself. Back home, the Liberty ship had become a national symbol. It wasn't just steel and rivets, it was people. A 19-year-old welder in Richmond could point to a newspaper and say, "That ship I helped build, it's bringing supplies to my brother in Italy." Shipyard posters read, "You build 'em, we'll finish the job." There were speed contests between shipyards, who could launch faster, who could weld smoother. It was competitive patriotism, and it worked. Men and women took pride in beating deadlines. In Savannah, Georgia, when one shipyard launched a Liberty ship in under a week, the workers celebrated with a marching band and fireworks. Each launch was treated like a victory parade. Even President Roosevelt joined in, declaring that Liberty ships were the arsenal of democracy afloat. By 1944, Liberty ships were everywhere. They carried tanks to North Africa, troops to Italy, fuel to the Pacific, and ammunition to Normandy. They supplied the Red Army through the Persian Gulf, fed London during the Blitz, and brought raw materials from as far away as India and Australia. There was hardly a corner of the war where a Liberty ship didn't make a difference. Even when damaged, these ships refused to die. Crews patched holes mid-voyage, used lifeboat oars as braces, and kept engines running after direct hits. One legendary ship, the SS Jeremiah O'Brien, survived multiple U-boat attacks and would later take part in the D-Day landings, and she still exists today, a living relic of American determination. As these reports reached Berlin, the shock turned into despair. Speer's ministry tried to accelerate shipbuilding, but the Reich's shipyards were already crippled by bombing raids and shortages. Germany could barely replace its own losses, while America built more in a month than Germany could in a year. Captured documents later revealed that the German naval staff estimated the Allies were adding 140,000 tons of shipping capacity per week. A stunned General Alfred Jodl, one of Hitler's top strategists, reportedly remarked, "They are producing ships as we produce bullets." To the German High Command, it was incomprehensible that a nation separated by an ocean could project such overwhelming power simply through manufacturing. They had underestimated what freedom could build. By 1944, the sheer presence of Liberty ships meant the Allies could plan and execute invasions at will, from Sicily to Normandy. Every major offensive depended on one thing: supply, and supply depended on the Liberty ships. While German generals boasted of panzers and V-weapons, America's quiet answer came not from the battlefield, but from the shipyards, where ordinary workers outperformed Hitler's war machine. This was the true turning point. The day Germany realized that it couldn't win, not because of bravery or tactics, but because it could no longer keep up. The Liberty ship wasn't just a vessel. It was the heartbeat of an industrial revolution in wartime. Proof that when a free people unite for a cause greater than themselves, they can forge not only ships, but destiny. June 6, 1944, D-Day. The beaches of Normandy were filled with thunder. The largest amphibious invasion in history was underway. Over 5,000 ships of every shape and size filled the English Channel. Warships, landing craft, tank carriers, and hundreds of Liberty ships. They carried the heartbeat of the invasion: fuel, ammunition, tanks, food, and troops. Without them, the beaches of Normandy would have been empty, the Allied armies stranded. On that day, Liberty ships delivered the supplies that made victory possible. They were the silent backbone of Operation Overlord, unseen, uncelebrated, but absolutely essential. Each vessel was a floating warehouse, packed with everything from medical kits to bulldozers. And as German guns opened fire from the cliffs, Liberty ship crews pressed on. Many ships were hit, some sank. But for every one that went down, 2 more arrived. The endless stream of ships overwhelmed German defenses and made one thing unmistakably clear. The Allies' strength was not luck, it was logistics. By mid-1944, American production was operating at levels the world had never seen before, and has never seen since. Every 12 hours, another Liberty ship slid into the ocean. Every week, tens of thousands of tons of cargo crossed the Atlantic. Factories back home worked in perfect rhythm with the front lines. A Soldier S bullet fired in Normandy might have been cast in a factory in Detroit only weeks earlier, and carried across the sea on a Liberty ship. The war machine was a living network, fast, precise, unstoppable. One German intelligence officer wrote, "For every blow we strike, 10 new enemies appear. Their factories never sleep, their ships never end." By late 1944, the once feared U-boat fleet was dying. Germany had invested everything into its submarine warfare, but America had rendered it useless through sheer scale. When U-boats ventured out, they found skies filled with Allied aircraft, oceans crawling with escort destroyers, and convoys stretching beyond the horizon. Their greatest weapon, fear, had been neutralized by mass production. Admiral Dönitz, the proud architect of Germany's U-boat arm, admitted in a report, "We cannot match the enemy's industrial output. We can sink their ships, but we cannot sink their factories." In the span of 3 years, the U-boat happy time had turned into a nightmare, and it was the Liberty ship, the humble, unglamorous cargo vessel, that had quietly delivered that defeat. By the war's end, the numbers told the story. 2,010 Liberty ships built between 1941 and 1945, each capable of carrying 10,000 tons of cargo. Together, they moved over 1/3 of all Allied supplies during the war. It was an achievement unmatched in military history, an industrial feat so vast that even America's ace enemies could not help but admire it. Captured German generals during post-war interrogations often expressed disbelief. "We calculated tonnage sunk," one general said, "but never imagined tonnage created." Another admitted, "Your ships came faster than we could destroy them." That was when we knew the war was lost. Back home, the shipbuilders, men and women alike, listened to the radio broadcasts of victory with tears in their eyes. Many had never seen the front lines, but they knew they had been part of something greater than themselves. A welder in Portland said it best, "We didn't fight the war with guns, we fought it with hammers." Those workers, who built through exhaustion, rain, and rationing, had played just as vital a role as the soldiers who stormed Normandy, or the pilots who flew over Berlin. Every Liberty ship that sailed was a victory of willpower over despair. The truth was undeniable. Germany had entered World War II with advanced technology, experienced generals, and fearless soldiers. But America had something different, a belief that ordinary people, working together, could achieve the impossible. It wasn't a single weapon that won the war. It wasn't a single battle. It was the collective effort of a nation that turned factories into fortresses and shipyards into battlefields. In the end, America's might wasn't just measured in tanks or planes, but in the courage of its workers and the endless line of Liberty ships sailing toward freedom. By 1945, the Atlantic was calm again. The Liberty ships had done their job, and then some. They had carried victory across the ocean, one steel hull at a time. When the last convoy sailed, the workers who built those ships didn't see themselves as heroes, but history would prove them wrong. The Liberty ship wasn't just a vessel of steel. It was a vessel of hope, built by millions of hands determined to keep liberty afloat. The Germans had their generals, the narrator concludes, but America had its workers. And in the end, that made all the difference. May 1945, the guns of Europe finally fell silent. The world had changed forever. Cities lay in ruins. Nations counted their losses. But amid the wreckage, something extraordinary remained. The vast fleet of Liberty ships that had carried the Allies to victory. Many of these vessels, battered and scarred, continued sailing long after the war. They transported refugees, rebuilt shattered economies, and even carried food to war-torn nations, including Germany itself. Yes, in a twist of history, the very ships that once helped defeat the Axis now delivered bread to their former enemies. From destruction came renewal. And once again, Liberty ships were there, proving that they weren't just symbols of war, but of recovery and resilience. After the war, dozens of Liberty ships were converted for civilian use. Some became cargo vessels, others floating warehouses, and a few, surprisingly, even became schools and museums. One such ship, the SS Jeremiah O'Brien, still sails today, lovingly preserved, a living monument to the men and women who built her. When she was restored and sailed across the Atlantic in 1994 for the 50th anniversary of D-Day, old shipyard workers and veterans stood on the docks, tears streaming down their faces. They were seeing a ghost from another era, a reminder of what ordinary people achieved when the world needed them most. "She's just a simple cargo ship," said one veteran, "but she carried the hopes of a generation." During post-war interrogations and memoirs, many German officers reflected on America's industrial miracle. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, one of the most respected commanders in the Luftwaffe, reportedly said, "The Americans wage war like engineers, not warriors. They measure victory in tons, not tactics." Another officer added grimly, "When we saw Liberty ships appear faster than we could sink them, we knew the outcome. Our science could not defeat their steel." The myth of Nazi technological superiority had been shattered, not by one weapon, but by relentless production. It wasn't just America's might that overwhelmed the Axis. It was America's capacity to never stop building. Yet the Liberty ship miracle came at a cost few talk about. In the race against time, the steel used was welded, not riveted, and in cold waters, this caused brittle fractures. Some ships literally broke in half without warning, victims of their own accelerated birth. But even this flaw became a lesson. Engineers studied these failures, leading to breakthroughs in metallurgy and ship design that still influence naval architecture today. In the end, even their weaknesses helped shape the future. The story of the Liberty ships isn't just about how many were built. It ends about why they were built. They represent a moment in history when an entire nation moved with one purpose, not for conquest, but for liberation. Housewives, farmers, and immigrants, people who had never seen the sea, became the shipbuilders of freedom. They didn't have fancy uniforms or medals, but they had calloused hands and unbreakable resolve. They fought not with bullets, the narrator says softly, but with bolts. And because of them, the world changed. Here's a fact most people don't know. Decades after World War II, during the Cold War, some Liberty ships were reactivated for use during the Korean and Vietnam Wars. The same vessels that once carried supplies to Normandy were now sailing to Asia, still serving the cause of freedom, nearly 30 years after they were built. Think about that. A ship designed to last 5 years ended up serving for decades. The Liberty ship wasn't just a wartime solution. It was a triumph of design and durability, built on faith, ingenuity, and speed. In the end, Germany's generals were right to be astonished. No army could outfight the American factory. No navy could outlast the American shipyard. The Liberty ships proved that victory in the modern age isn't just won on battlefields. It's won in the factories, in the foundries, and in the hearts of ordinary people who refuse to give up. They were the ships that kept liberty afloat, and they changed the world forever. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell, because every week we uncover another untold story of courage, innovation, and history's hidden heroes. This was WWW2 Valor Echoes. And remember, freedom isn't forged in peace. It's built in the fire of struggle, one liberty ship at a time.